What's happening, fam? L.A.R. movement still moving. Subscribe or die trying. You see the thumbnail. I was watching clips and they had the older clip about when with Mike Tyson, when the interviewer asked him about his daughter passing, and he was like, he basically told him, you know, he thought about getting his gun and just going crazy when he heard the news, and he went to the hospital, and he saw how the other parents were and how they were dealing with their children's death with such dignity and grace, and who was he to go crazy. And then he said, and then he paused and he said, you know, you gotta go, you understand, right? And it always shakes me up as a person, because he was like, you know, he said, I got to grow up. That's what Mike Tyson said, I got to grow up, man. And the interviewer was like, it's okay to cry, Mike. But he was like, I just got to grow up. I got to deal with stuff. And I say this respectfully. In my eyes, Mike Tyson is one of the truest human beings to walk the earth. As far as boxers, he's not my favorite. Okay, Roy Jones is my favorite. Mark Jones, Marvin Hagler, Floyd Mayweather, you know, Sergio Martinez, you know, those are my favorites. Miguel Cotto and stuff like that, you know. But Mike, you know, not necessarily my favorite, but he's up there. He's one of the greatest. But as far as a human being, Mike Tyson is what is the totality, the closest I've seen in my life to somebody who's been through a complete human experience from this end to that end. And I don't think most of us can handle that. You got to understand, Mike went from being poor to rich. You know what I'm saying? Mike, by his own admission, he went to being touched as a kid to being fetishized. You know what I'm saying? Mike went from being in prison to mansions. You know what I mean? He went from being a kid who was fat and bullied to becoming the baddest man on the planet. He went from a guy who was very disciplined and strict to a guy who was just a drug addict. You get what I mean? He went from a guy who's been married, divorced, had kids. He's lived longer than a kid died. You know what I'm saying? So he has had to bury his own child. Like, a man who literally, he's an animal lover, but he cares for pigeons, and he had pet tigers that he plays with both. You know what I'm saying? Like, I think he had a lion too. If that Charlie Murphy story is like, the lion had a full mane. Like, he was like, that was the most manly thing I've ever seen in my life. A guy who literally fought for a living, and a guy who made fun of himself for a living, cracked jokes, you know. He's a guy who's been looked at as extremely volatile and crazy, and a guy that's been looked at as extremely sensitive. You know, a guy who people thought was dumb, and then when you talk to him, he's a very learned man. He's an avid reader, so he's a very smart guy. He's like in my opinion, he's like a guru. And a guy who sees himself, who sometimes sees himself as damaged, but in my eyes, he's more human and and more made for life than any of us. You know what I'm saying? Because of his experiences. You know, a guy who's been every bad thing you can say to be true, and a guy who's been lied on and been and thrown under the bus, and everybody know who was lied on. See what I'm saying? So a guy who's been giving to people, and a guy who's been stolen from tremendously. So, like, a lot of us aren't really built for having a human experience like that. We're just not. You know, a lot of us think we are, but his human experience is the highs and lows of the extreme. So if you see him as an extreme person, an extreme personality, how extreme your life ain't been that extreme. You haven't had that type of human experience. So, you know, a guy who recently, a guy walked up to him, asked him to fight, flashed the gun on him. He didn't flinch, and then he gave the guy a hug. Like, Mike Tyson is just a great human being, you know, because he's been able to deal with the human experience at a level that we can't, that we just can't fathom. So that's just my thoughts. Like, share, subscribe, or die. Try and catch you on the next one. Peace.